Tonight, there's a taste of whiskey, metal, and regret in the air. Just like every night for the past 3 years. I'm sitting in my apartment in San Diego, 3rd floor, window overlooking the Pacific Ocean. After everything that's happened, you might think I'd want to live somewhere surrounded by land. Nebraska, perhaps. Kansas. Somewhere where even the ocean's scent can't reach. But I can't. Something keeps pulling me back to the water, like I'm hooked. My name is Ethan Mallory, former petty officer, 1st class, United States Navy. For 11 years, I was one of the best sonar technicians in the submarine fleet. I could hear things in the deep that other operators missed, identify submarine signatures from background noise with accuracy that earned me 3 commendations and the respect of every crew I served with. The ocean spoke to me in frequencies and vibrations, and I understood her language better than I understood people. That was before the USS Barracuda, before I learned that some things in the deep should never be heard, should never be found. You want to know what really happened to the Barracuda? The official story says equipment failure during routine patrol operations in the Western Pacific. 37 crew members lost, 3 survivors pulled from the water suffering from severe decompression injuries, and what the Navy doctors called trauma-induced psychosis. Clean. Simple. Completely false. I was there. I heard what we found. Saw what looked back at us from depths where nothing should be able to survive. And I've spent 3 years trying to forget, trying to convince myself that the Navy psychiatrists were right, that my mind created elaborate fantasies to cope with the horror of watching my friends die. But it wasn't fantasy. It was real, and it's still down there. The ice rattles in my glass. My hands shake worse when I'm sober, so I don't let myself get sober very often. Dr. Vega, my VA therapist, says the tremors are a physical manifestation of unprocessed trauma. What he doesn't know, what I can never tell him because of the documents I signed in blood and federal law, is that my hand started shaking the moment that thing wrapped itself around our submarine. The moment I realized we weren't the apex predators we thought we were. I should start at the beginning, not the official beginning in the Navy reports, but the real beginning. The day Dr. Adrian Locke walked into our briefing room at Naval Base Pearl Harbor with eyes that had seen something they shouldn't have. It was September 14th, 3 years ago. The Barracuda had just completed a 6-month overhaul in dry dock, and we were scheduled for what Captain Noah Granger called a milk run, routine surveillance operations tracking Chinese submarine movements near the Spratly Islands. Standard Cold War 2.0 stuff. Nothing we hadn't done 100 times before. I remember walking into the briefing room that morning thinking about my sister's wedding in December, wondering if I'd be back stateside in time or if I'd miss another family event because of deployment schedules. The room smelled like coffee and the peculiar mixture of salt air and electronics that permeated every building on the base. Captain Granger stood at the front of the room, but he wasn't alone. Next to him was a civilian I'd never seen before. Tall, maybe 50, with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of pale skin that suggested someone who spent most of their time underground or in windowless rooms. He wore khakis and a polo shirt, but everything about his posture screamed government contractor, Defense Department, maybe DARPA. "Gentlemen," Granger began, his voice carrying the Tennessee drawl that became more pronounced when he was nervous. "This is Dr. Adrian Locke from the Naval Research Laboratory. He's going to brief us on a change to our mission parameters." I exchanged glances with Marcus Sullivan, our chief engineer. Mission changes were unusual this close to departure. Usually meant something political had shifted, or intelligence had picked up a target too important to ignore. Dr. Locke stepped forward and pulled up a map on the wall screen. Instead of the South China Sea routes we'd been studying for weeks, the map showed a section of the Pacific between Guam and the Mariana Trench. Deep water. Deepest in the world, actually. Places where the ocean floor dropped away into darkness that had never seen sunlight. 3 weeks ago, Locke began, his voice precise and academic. Our deep ocean monitoring stations detected an anomalous acoustic signature approximately 200 miles northwest of Guam. The signature doesn't match any known geological activity, biological source, or man-made object in our databases. He pressed a button and audio began playing through the briefing room speakers. At first, I heard nothing unusual, just the ambient sound of deep ocean. The kind of low-frequency rumble that comes from water moving across vast distances. But then, underneath it, I caught something else. A pulse. Regular. Rhythmic. Like a heartbeat, but slower. Much slower. Each pulse separated by exactly 12 seconds. The hair on my arm stood up. In 11 years of sonar work, I'd never heard anything like it. The signature has been continuous for 3 weeks, Locke continued. The interval between pulses never varies by more than 0.03 seconds. That kind of precision doesn't occur in nature. Chinese submarine? Asked Lieutenant Commander Sarah Bennett, our XO. Maybe an experimental propulsion system? Locke shook his head. The acoustic profile doesn't match any propulsion technology we're aware of, and the signal originates from approximately 38,000 feet below the surface, well beyond the operational depth of any submarine in existence. The room went quiet. 38,000 feet. That was nearly 8 miles down, past the absolute limits of even the most advanced deep-sea submersibles. In the Hadal zone, where the pressure would crush a normal submarine like an aluminum can. What are we supposed to do about it? Granger asked. His Tennessee drawl had disappeared completely. The Barracuda is rated for 3,000 feet, maybe 4,000 in an emergency. We can't operate at those depths. You won't need to, Locke said. We just need you to position the Barracuda directly above the source and use your sonar arrays to gather detailed acoustic data. Your equipment is the most sensitive mobile platform we have available on short notice. I raised my hand slightly, the way you learn to do in the military when you want to ask a question without seeming disrespectful. Granger nodded at me. Sir, I addressed Locke, if this signature has been broadcasting for 3 weeks, why hasn't anyone investigated yet? Why wait for a submarine to be available? Locke's expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. Something that looked like fear, quickly suppressed. Previous attempts to investigate were inconclusive. We need more sophisticated equipment and a crew capable of operating in potentially challenging conditions. Previous attempts, Sullivan said slowly. You mean something already went down there? The briefing materials will provide additional details, Locke replied, which was government speak for, I'm not going to answer that question. Captain Granger studied the map on the screen. How long do you need us on station? 72 hours minimum? Longer if possible. We need comprehensive data across multiple frequencies and environmental conditions. Locke pulled up another display, this one showing technical specifications that made my stomach tighten. The signature appears to be responsive. When our monitoring stations increased their active sonar pings, the source signal changed frequency and intensity. It might be reacting to external stimuli. Reacting, I said. You mean it might be intelligent? Locke looked directly at me for the first time. That's what we need you to help us determine, Petty Officer Mallory. The Barracuda left Pearl Harbor 48 hours later. 353 feet of nuclear-powered attack submarine, carrying 37 crew members and enough weapons to sink a small fleet. We were one of the Navy's newest Virginia-class boats, equipped with sonar systems that could detect a wrench dropped on a deck 200 miles away. I spent the first 3 days of transit calibrating my equipment and studying the acoustic data Locke had provided. The more I listened to that 12-second pulse, the more it bothered me. The signal didn't behave like anything in my experience. It wasn't mechanical, too organic, too fluid in its harmonics. But it wasn't biological either. No whale, no giant squid, nothing in the ocean produced sounds with that kind of mathematical precision. Marcus found me in the sonar room on day 4, hunched over my displays with headphones clamped over my ears. He'd brought coffee, which meant he wanted to talk. "You look like hell," he said, setting a mug next to my keyboard. "Thanks. You look like a romance novel cover model yourself." Marcus grinned. He was built like a linebacker and had the kind of square jaw that made him popular in port cities. "Seriously, though, you've been in here for 16 hours. When's the last time you slept?" I pulled off the headphones and rubbed my eyes. "I'm trying to understand this signal before we get there. Something about it doesn't make sense." "Let me guess. Everything about it doesn't make sense." "The consistency bothers me," I said. 12 seconds, Marcus. Exactly 12 seconds over and over. For weeks. That's not a malfunction. That's not random. That's intentional. So, what is it? I turned back to my displays, pulling up the waveform analysis. "I think it's a beacon." "A beacon for what?" "That's what scares me." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I did some research on Dr. Locke. He's not just Naval Research Laboratory. He's part of something called the Deep Ocean Phenomena Study Group. They investigate anomalous events in extreme ocean environments." Define anomalous. That's the thing. The whole program is classified, but I found references to it in some congressional oversight documents from 5 years ago. Apparently, they were asking for increased funding after what they called contact events in various ocean trenches worldwide. My hands had started shaking again. I wrapped them around the coffee mug to hide the tremor. Contact events. You mean they've encountered things like this before? Maybe. Or maybe Locke is just a marine biologist with government funding and we're investigating some weird deep-sea creature that evolution forgot to mention to the rest of us. I wanted to believe that, I really did, but the fear in Locke's eyes during the briefing had been real. That wasn't a man worried about discovering a new species of fish. That was a man who'd seen something that changed the way he understood the world. "Did you find out what happened to the previous investigation?" I asked. "The inconclusive one Locke mentioned?" Marcus shook his head. "Nothing in the databases I can access. But I talked to a friend at Subland. He said about 6 weeks ago, they lost contact with a research vessel that was operating in the same area. Ship was called the Endeavor Surveyor. Civilian crew, government contract, deep ocean survey equipment. Lost contact how? Just vanished. One day they were sending data, the next day nothing. No distress signal, no wreckage, no survivors. Coast Guard searched for 2 weeks and found exactly 0 trace. The coffee suddenly tasted like acid. And now they're sending us to the same spot, with specific instructions not to mention the Endeavor Surveyor in any official capacity," Marcus said. "My friend made me promise not to tell anyone. Said the Navy was treating it as a classified incident." I thought about that for a long time after Marcus left. Thought about ships disappearing and acoustic signatures that pulsed with mechanical precision from depths no human had ever reached. Thought about Dr. Locke's eyes and the documents I'd signed before departure. Standard non-disclosure agreements that seemed excessive for a routine research mission. The Navy knew something. They knew something was down there in the deep, and they were sending us to find it. Or maybe to confirm what they already suspected. Either way, I had a feeling we weren't going to like what we discovered. We reached the coordinates on September 22nd, just after dawn. The ocean was calm, unusually calm for this part of the Pacific. The water stretched in every direction like dark glass, reflecting clouds that hung low and gray over the horizon. Captain Granger ordered us to dive at 0800 hours. I was already at my station, running final checks on the sonar arrays as we descended through the water column. The submarine settled into a smooth glide, her nuclear reactor providing silent power as we slipped beneath the surface. 200 feet, 500, 1,000. The world above us disappeared, replaced by the pressure and darkness of the deep ocean. This was my element. This was where I felt most comfortable, surrounded by technology that let me see with sound, navigating an environment that killed humans in seconds without protection. At 1,500 feet, we leveled off and Captain Granger gave the order to go passive. Active sonar was too loud, too revealing. We'd listen first, map the acoustic environment, locate our target using the same techniques submarines had used for decades to track enemy vessels without being detected. I adjusted my headphones and brought up the long-range passive arrays. Immediately, the 12-second pulse filled my ears. It was clearer here, stronger. No longer filtered through miles of ocean and multiple monitoring stations. This was the source, broadcasting into the deep with power that made my equipment strain to process the input. Contact bearing 270, range approximately 15 miles, I announced, my voice steady despite the adrenaline starting to pump through my system. Signal strength is consistent with source data, depth estimated at 38,000 feet. Jesus, Sarah Bennett muttered from the XO station. That's nearly 8 miles straight down. Granger stood behind me, studying my displays. Any other contacts? I swept through the frequencies, checking for submarines, surface vessels, biologics. Negative, sir. Ocean is clear except for our target. All right, let's get closer. Nice and slow. Mallory, I want continuous updates on that signal. Any change in frequency, intensity, anything at all. Aye, Captain. The Barracuda moved forward through the dark water, her hull cutting through the pressure with barely a whisper. I kept my attention locked on the sonar displays, watching the target grow closer with each passing minute. 14 miles. 13. 12. The pulse never changed. 12 seconds, exactly 12 seconds, over and over. Each beat sending vibrations through the ocean that I could feel in my chest even through the submarine's hull. At 10 miles, I noticed something new. The signal wasn't just a single frequency. It was a complex harmonic structure, multiple tones layered together in a pattern that almost sounded like language? No, that was crazy. But the more I listened, the more I heard structure, organization, intelligence. Captain, I said carefully, the signal is more complex than the initial data suggested. I'm detecting harmonic patterns that might indicate. The submarine lurched suddenly, throwing me forward against my console. Alarms began screaming throughout the boat as we started sliding sideways through the water, pushed by a current that shouldn't have existed at this depth. What the hell was that? Granger shouted over the alarms. Marcus's voice came over the intercom from engineering. Massive water displacement directly below us, Captain. Something just moved down there, something big. I stared at my sonar display, watching as a contact appeared beneath the Barracuda. Not a small contact, not a whale or a submarine. This was enormous. The signature stretched across my screen for what had to be miles, rising from the deep toward our position. Contact, I announced, my voice shaking. Bearing directly below, depth now 30,000 feet and ascending. Size and... Captain, this can't be right. The contact is measuring over 3 miles in length. Sarah Bennett moved to my station, looking over my shoulder at the display. Her face went pale. That's not possible. Nothing in the ocean is that large. It's rising fast, I said. 500 feet per minute. Temperature signature is... I adjusted my sensors, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Captain, the contact is giving off heat. Significant thermal radiation. It's warmer than the surrounding water. Granger grabbed the intercom. All hands, rig for deep dive. Emergency descent, maximum rate. Get us away from that thing. But even as we began diving, I could see on my display that it wouldn't matter. The contact was rising faster than we could descend, and now, as it came closer, I could hear new sounds through my headphones. Not just the 12-second pulse. These were different. Organic. The sound of something massive moving through water, displacing pressure waves that made the Barracuda feel like a toy boat in a bathtub. 25,000 feet. 20,000. 15,000. The thing was getting closer. And as it rose toward us, I realized with growing horror that the 12-second pulse wasn't just a signal. It was a heartbeat. The submarine's hull began to groan, not the normal sounds of metal adjusting to pressure. These were deeper, more stressed. The kind of sounds that made engineers nervous and sailors pray. "Rate of ascent is increasing," I reported, trying to keep my voice professional while my hands shook on the controls. "Contact now at 12,000 feet, rising at 800 feet per minute. Captain, at this rate it will reach our depth in 7 minutes. Granger's face had gone hard, the way it did when he was making calculations that might save our lives or get us all killed. "Can you classify it? Submarine? Surface vessel? Biological?" I cycled through every classification protocol I knew. The signal didn't match anything in our databases, too massive for any whale species. Wrong acoustic signature for a submarine or any mechanical object. But the thermal readings and the organic movement patterns suggested something alive, something that generated its own heat at depths where the water temperature hovered just above freezing. "Unknown, sir, but based on thermal output and movement characteristics, I think it might be biological." "Nothing biological can survive at those depths," Sarah said, but her voice wavered. We all knew that was what the textbooks said. The textbooks also said nothing could grow to be 3 miles long. "Emergency ascent," Granger ordered. "Get us to the surface. Maximum rise rate." Marcus's voice crackled over the intercom. "Captain, emergency ascent from this depth risks structural damage. We need to—" "I know the risks. Do it anyway." The Barracuda's nose angled upward sharply as we began rocketing toward the surface. Ballast tanks blew with explosive force, compressed air forcing water out to make us buoyant. The submarine shuddered and groaned as we climbed, her hull creaking under rapidly changing pressure. But it wasn't fast enough. "Contact at 8,000 feet, I called out. "Still rising. We're not going to make it to the surface before—" The sonar display went white with noise as something enormous passed directly beneath us. The pressure wave hit a second later, tossing the Barracuda sideways like a leaf in a hurricane. I was thrown from my seat, crashing into a bulkhead as the submarine rolled nearly 40 degrees. Loose equipment crashed across the compartment. Someone screamed. The lights flickered. When the submarine finally stabilized, I pulled myself back to my station. Blood ran down my forehead from where I'd hit the wall, but I ignored it. My display had rebooted and was processing the new acoustic data. What I saw made my blood turn to ice. The contact hadn't passed beneath us. It had surrounded us. "Captain," I said slowly, "we're inside it." "Inside what?" "The contact. Whatever this thing is, we're now inside its profile. It's—" I zoomed out on my display, trying to comprehend the scope of what I was seeing. "Sir, I think we're inside a cavity in its body structure. Like it opened itself up and we're in an internal chamber." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "Oh my God." The 12-second pulse was deafening now, vibrating through the hull with such force that I could see ripples in my coffee mug. Each beat felt like standing next to a massive speaker, the bass frequencies so powerful they bypassed my ears and resonated directly in my chest cavity. Granger moved to my station. "Can we navigate out of it?" I cycled through different sensor modes, trying to map the space around us. The cavity is approximately 2 miles wide and extends down beyond our sensor range. I'm detecting what might be walls or membranes on all sides. They appear to be moving, pulsing in sync with that heartbeat. "We're inside a living creature," Marcus said over the intercom. He'd abandoned his engineering station and was standing in the control room doorway, his face slack with shock. "Holy Mother of God, we're inside something alive." "Options," Granger snapped. "I need options right now." "We could try active sonar," I suggested. "Map the internal structure, look for an exit." "And alert whatever this thing is that we're here?" Sarah shook her head. "It might not even know we're inside it yet. Active sonar could trigger a defensive response." "Then what do we do? Wait here until we run out of air?" Before anyone could answer, my passive arrays picked up a new sound. This one wasn't coming from the creature's heartbeat. It was higher pitched, more complex, almost like communication. I isolated the frequency and played it through the speakers. The sound that filled the control room made everyone fall silent. It was a series of modulated tones, rising and falling in patterns that repeated every 30 seconds. Mathematical, deliberate, like someone counting, or maybe singing. "That's not random," I said. "That's structured, intentional." Dr. Locke's voice suddenly crackled over the submarine's secure communication channel. He'd been monitoring our situation from a surface vessel positioned 30 miles away. "Barracuda, this is Control. Do not respond to that signal. I repeat, do not respond." "Control, this is Barracuda Actual," Granger replied. "We're inside the contact. Situation is critical. Advise. Maintain absolute silence. No active sonar. No engine noise above minimum steerage. You're inside what we believe is a sensory chamber. It's trying to understand what you are." "A sensory chamber," Sarah repeated. "You're saying this thing is examining us?" "Affirmative. Based on previous encounters, we believe these entities use internal cavities to sample and analyze objects of interest. If you remain passive, it may eventually release you." Marcus had gone pale. "Previous encounters? You've known about these things? How many are there?" "That's classified. Right now your priority is—" The communication channel dissolved into static as the creature's heartbeat suddenly doubled in speed. The 12-second interval shortened to 6 seconds, then 3. The submarine began to move, not through water, but through something else. Something more viscous. Organic. "We're descending," Sarah announced, watching the depth gauge spin upward. 2,000 feet, 3,000, 4,000. "All stop," Granger ordered. "Kill the reactor. Everything off except life support." The Barracuda went dark and silent. Emergency lights cast red shadows across faces, tight with fear. We were drifting now, no longer under our control, being carried deeper into the creature's body by currents we couldn't see or resist. 5,000 feet, 6,000, 7,000. "We're going below our operational depth," Marcus said quietly. "At 8,000 feet, the hull starts taking permanent damage." 8,000 feet, 9,000. The groaning from the hull intensified. I could hear rivets popping, metal deforming under pressure that our submarine was never designed to handle. We were in the danger zone now. Every second we went deeper, the chances of catastrophic implosion increased exponentially. "Captain," I said, "I'm detecting structural sounds from the creature's internal anatomy. It's massive. Whatever this thing is, it has organs the size of city blocks, circulatory systems that run for miles. This isn't just large. This is geological. This thing is built on a scale that shouldn't be possible for biological life." "Nothing is impossible," Granger said. "We're living proof of that right now." 10,000 feet. Then, suddenly, we stopped moving. The descent halted, leaving us suspended in the creature's internal cavity at a depth that should have crushed our submarine flat. "Why aren't we imploding?" Sarah asked. "The pressure at this depth should be—" "Look at the hull stress indicators," Marcus interrupted. "They're reading normal, like we're at 300 feet, not 10,000. I checked my sensors. He was right. The external pressure readings were impossible. We should have been experiencing over 4,000 pounds per square inch. Instead, my equipment showed barely 200 psi. The creature was somehow compensating for the depth, maintaining an environment inside its body that kept us from being destroyed. "It's protecting us," I said slowly. "Whatever this thing is, it doesn't want to damage us. It wants to study us." The modulated tones returned, louder now, closer. I could hear them through the hull without any electronic amplification, vibrating through the steel and into the air we breathed. The pattern had changed, becoming more complex, more urgent. "It's trying to communicate," Sarah said. Or it's calling for something, Marcus added. Could be sending a signal to other creatures like it. I didn't want to think about that. One creature this size was incomprehensible enough. The idea that there might be more of them, responding to some kind of hive communication, was too horrific to process. Granger made a decision. Mallory, can you use the sonar to map our surroundings? I want to know everything about where we are. Maybe we can find a way out. Active sonar risks. I know the risks. Do it anyway. We can't just sit here waiting to die. I activated the active sonar arrays, sending out a pulse of sound that spread through the creature's internal cavity. The return signal painted a picture on my display that made my stomach turn over. We were inside a chamber that stretched for miles in every direction. The walls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, creating light that my sonar couldn't register, but that penetrated the hull through tiny viewing ports designed to withstand pressure. Green and blue light, swirling in patterns that seemed almost hypnotic. But what made me want to scream was what the sonar showed in the center of the chamber. An eye. An eye the size of a football stadium, looking directly at our submarine. "Oh, Jesus," Marcus whispered. "Oh, Jesus Christ." The eye was perfect, too perfect. A massive lens that focused on us with intelligent precision. Around it, I could see what appeared to be neural clusters, processing centers that glowed with electrical activity. This wasn't just a sensory organ. This was a brain, or part of a brain, a section dedicated to analyzing whatever entered this chamber. We weren't inside a stomach, we weren't inside a trap. We were inside a mind. The creature was thinking about us. "Control, this is Barracuda," Granger said into the dead communication channel. "If you can hear us, we need immediate extraction protocols. We are inside a biological structure that demonstrates clear signs of intelligence. Repeat, this entity is intelligent and currently analyzing our vessel." Only static answered him. The eye moved. I watched on my sonar display as that impossible organ shifted, muscles the size of buildings contracting to adjust its focus. The lens changed shape, accommodating for distance, examining us from different angles. The modulated tones increased in frequency and complexity. "It's running diagnostics," I said, "like a doctor examining a patient. It's trying to understand our construction, our purpose, what we're made of." "Can it read our minds?" Sarah asked. "I don't know, but it's definitely reading our hull signature, our electromagnetic emissions, probably our reactor output. It knows we're technological. It knows we're artificial." The eye's pupil suddenly contracted, focusing on a specific point on the Barracuda's hull. The spot where our nuclear reactor generated power. The modulated tones reached a crescendo, then stopped abruptly. The silence was worse than the noise. "What happened?" Granger asked. I swallowed hard. "I think it just figured out we're nuclear powered. It understands we're carrying radioactive material." "And?" Before I could answer, the creature's entire body began to convulse. The chamber walls contracted violently, squeezing inward. The Barracuda was thrown sideways, then up, then down. I held onto my console as the submarine tumbled through the organic cavity like a toy in a dryer. "It's trying to expel us," Sarah shouted over the sound of groaning metal. "Or kill us," Marcus countered. The walls kept contracting, pushing us upward with incredible force. The depth gauge spun backward, 10,000 feet, 8,000, 5,000, 3,000. We were being ejected. The Barracuda shot out of the creature's body like a torpedo from a tube. 1 second, we were inside the organic chamber. The next, we were in open ocean, being propelled upward by a pressure wave that moved us faster than our own engines ever could. 1,000 feet, 500, 200. We broke the surface at nearly 40 miles per hour, the submarine launching partially out of the water before crashing back down in an explosion of foam and spray. Alarms screamed as systems overloaded from the violent ascent. I tasted blood in my mouth where I'd bitten my tongue. But we were alive. "Damage report," Granger croaked. Reports started coming in from throughout the boat. Hull integrity compromised in 6 compartments, reactor temperature spiking, sonar arrays damaged. But nothing catastrophic, nothing that would kill us immediately. I pulled myself back to my station and checked the passive sonar. The creature was still below us, descending rapidly back toward the deep. Within 3 minutes, it had disappeared beyond the range of my sensors, returning to the abyssal depths where it belonged, where it and possibly others like it had lived for God knew how long, hidden in places humans weren't meant to go. Dr. Locke's voice returned on the communication channel. "Barracuda, this is Control. Status report." Granger stared at the speaker for a long moment before responding. "We're alive. Barely. That thing analyzed us and then spit us out like we were poison. The nuclear signature probably triggered a defensive response. These entities appear to be sensitive to radiation. Did you gather acoustic data during the encounter?" "Did we?" Granger's voice rose to a shout. "We just got eaten and regurgitated by something the size of a mountain range, and you want to know if we got good recordings?" "Captain, you need to understand the significance of—" "No, you need to understand something. Whatever those things are, they're intelligent. They're not animals. They're not mindless behemoths. That thing examined us. It studied us. It made decisions about what to do with us based on analysis and reasoning." Locke was silent for several seconds. Then, "That's why we needed your data. To confirm what we suspected. There are intelligences in the deep ocean that predate human civilization. They've been there for millions of years, possibly longer. And now that we've made contact, everything changes." "Changes how?" "That's above my clearance level. But I can tell you that what you encountered today was just one of many. We've been tracking acoustic signatures from 17 different ocean trenches worldwide. All of them show the same characteristics, the same 12-second pulse, the same complex communication patterns. They form a network, Captain, a distributed consciousness that spans the entire planet." I felt my hands start shaking again. The whiskey couldn't stop it this time. Nothing could. "We're going home," Granger said. "We're getting this boat back to Pearl Harbor, and then you and whoever you work for can find someone else to send into the deep. My crew didn't sign up to be lab rats for things that should never have been found." "I'm afraid that's not possible, Captain. You have orders to remain on station for another 48 hours. We need additional data points." "Like hell we're staying. We're heading home. That's final." The communication channel went dead. We all looked at each other, understanding what Granger had just done. Disobeying direct orders from what was probably the Department of Defense, career-ending at best, court-martial at worst. But nobody argued with him. We'd all seen the eye. We'd all felt what it was like to be inside something that could think and reason and decide whether to keep us or dispose of us. Granger turned to our navigator. "Set course for Pearl Harbor. Best possible speed." "Aye, Captain." But as the Barracuda began limping eastward, I kept my eyes on the sonar display, kept watching the depths, because I could still hear it in my headphones, faint but unmistakable, that 12-second pulse, and it was getting stronger. We never made it back to Pearl Harbor. Not the way we planned, anyway. The Barracuda limped through the Pacific for 6 hours before they found us. Not they, as in the Navy. They, as in the things Dr. Locke had mentioned, the distributed consciousness, the network. I was the first to hear them coming. We were running on the surface, doing 15 knots with half our systems damaged and the crew taking shifts to manage the failing equipment. I'd stayed at my sonar station despite Marcus ordering me to get some rest. Couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that massive eye staring at us with intelligence that made me feel like an insect under a microscope. The 12-second pulse had been getting steadily louder for the past 3 hours, not just from behind us, where we'd encountered the first creature, but from ahead of us too, and from both sides. The acoustic signatures were converging on our position from multiple directions. "Captain," I said into my headset, trying to keep my voice steady. "You need to come to the sonar room, right now." Granger arrived within 2 minutes, Sarah right behind him. They took one look at my display and went pale. 4 contacts, each one measuring 3 to 4 miles in length, each one broadcasting the same 12-second pulse. They were approaching from north, south, east, and west, forming a perfect box around our submarine, moving at speeds that should have been impossible for something that massive, creating pressure waves I could feel through the hull even though they were still 20 miles away. "They're coordinating," Sarah said. "That's deliberate. They've positioned themselves to cut off any escape route." "How fast are they moving?" Granger asked. I checked my calculations twice before answering. 40 knots, sir. They're matching our speed exactly, adjusting their positions to maintain the same distance from us. Nothing that large should be able to move that fast. Nothing that large should be able to exist, but here we are. Granger grabbed the communication system. "Control, this is Barracuda. We have 4 large contacts converging on our position. Whatever the first one was, there are more of them, and they're hunting us." Dr. Locke's response was immediate. "Captain, you need to go to full stop immediately." "Are you insane? We need to outrun them." "You can't outrun them. They're faster than you are, and they have effectively unlimited range. Your only chance is to show them you're not a threat. Go to full stop, kill your reactor, and wait." "Wait for what? For them to decide whether to eat us or spit us out again?" "They're not predators, Captain. They're curious. The first encounter proved that. They examine things they don't understand, then release them. But if you run, if you act like prey, their response might be different." Granger looked at me, then at Sarah. I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Trust the mysterious government scientist who'd already gotten us into this mess, or trust his own instincts about running from danger? "The scientist might be right," I said quietly. "That first creature could have killed us easily. It didn't. It studied us and let us go." "Or it spit us out because we tasted bad," Sarah countered. "Nuclear submarines probably aren't part of their normal diet." The 4 contacts were now 15 miles away and closing. I could see on my display how they were adjusting their approach vectors, maintaining perfect geometric spacing. This wasn't random. This was strategy, organization, intelligence. "All stop," Granger finally ordered. "Kill the reactor. Secure all non-essential systems." The Barracuda went silent. We drifted on the surface, dead in the water, while 4 impossible creatures converged on our position from different directions. The crew knew something was wrong. You can't hide that kind of tension on a submarine. Word had spread throughout the boat about what we'd encountered, and now everyone was waiting to see if we'd survive the next hour. I watched my sonar display as the contacts drew closer. 10 miles, 5 miles, 3 miles. At 1 mile, they stopped advancing. All 4 of them, simultaneously, as if responding to a single command. They held their positions in a perfect square around us, each one exactly 1 nautical mile from the Barracuda. The 12-second pulses from all 4 creatures synchronized. For the first time, I heard them beating in unison, creating a resonance that made the submarine vibrate like a tuning fork. "They're communicating," I said. "All 4 of them. The pulses are synchronized down to the millisecond. That's not coincidence. That's coordination." "What are they saying?" "I don't know, but it's definitely structured. There's information being transmitted in those pulses, complex information." The synchronized beating continued for 3 minutes. Then, one by one, the creatures began to ascend. I watched their depth markers climb from 30,000 feet to 20,000 to 10,000. "They're surfacing," I announced. "All 4 of them." Sarah moved to the periscope, raising it above the waterline. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Captain, you need to see this." Granger looked through the periscope. His face went slack. I abandoned my station and climbed the ladder to the conning tower, pushing through the hatch to stand on the submarine's deck. What I saw made my legs weak. The ocean around us was no longer ocean. it had become something else. 4 massive forms broke the surface simultaneously, water cascading off bodies that stretched to the horizon in every direction. They weren't shaped like whales or any creature I'd ever seen. They were more like living islands, vast organic structures covered in bioluminescent patterns that pulsed and flowed like northern lights made of flesh. Each creature had dozens of eyes, not enormous like the one we'd seen in the internal chamber, but still massive, each one the size of a house, and all of them were looking at us. The closest creature raised what might have been a feeding appendage or a sensory organ. It was easily 500 feet long and covered in smaller tendrils that writhed in the air. The appendage moved toward the Barracuda with terrifying precision, extending across the water with movements that seemed almost gentle. "Should we fire?" Sarah's voice crackled over my radio. "We have torpedoes loaded. Maybe we can—" "No," I said. "Look at them. Really look." The appendage stopped 10 feet from the submarine. The tendrils reached out, not touching us, but moving around our hull in patterns that reminded me of someone examining an object in a museum. Curious, careful, trying to understand without causing damage. The other 3 creatures were doing the same thing, each one extending appendages toward us, creating a cage of organic matter that surrounded the Barracuda from all sides. But it wasn't aggressive. It was investigative. "They're not going to hurt us," I said. "They're just studying us." The synchronized pulses changed frequency, becoming higher pitched, more complex, and underneath the pulses, I started to hear something else. Something that sounded like voices? No, that couldn't be right. But there was definitely vocalization happening, sounds being produced that had nothing to do with heartbeats or biological functions. They were talking to each other. About us. Dr. Locke's voice burst over the radio. "Barracuda, we're reading massive bioluminescent activity from all 4 contacts. They're exchanging information at an incredible rate. Whatever they're discussing, it's complex, possibly a debate about what to do with you." "A debate," Granger repeated. "You're saying these things have political discussions?" "I'm saying they have culture, Captain. Society. They're not animals. They might be more intelligent than we are. They've certainly been around longer." One of the creature's eyes moved closer to where I stood on the deck. I could see my reflection in its lens, a tiny human figure standing on a metal vessel, dwarfed by an intelligence that made our entire civilization look primitive by comparison. The eye studied me for 10 seconds. Then it blinked, a massive eyelid sliding across the lens with oiled precision. And in that moment of contact, I felt something. Not a voice in my head, nothing like telepathy from science fiction, but an understanding, a communication that bypassed language entirely. They were old, so impossibly old that they remembered when the continents were in different positions, when humans were still climbing down from trees and learning to make fire. They had watched our species evolve, had observed our boats getting bigger and more sophisticated, had noticed when we started sending nuclear-powered vessels into the deep. And they were concerned. We were getting too close to their world, too deep, too invasive. The encounter with the first creature hadn't been random. It had been a warning, a gentle one, a reminder that the ocean depths belonged to them and that we should be careful about how far we pushed into territories we didn't understand. But they weren't hostile, not yet. They were giving us a choice. Stay in the shallows, in the parts of the ocean we could survive in naturally, and they would leave us alone. But keep sending submarines into the trenches, keep disturbing the places where they lived and raised their young and conducted their ancient civilization, and the warnings would become something else. The eye pulled back. The appendages withdrew. One by one, the 4 creatures began to descend, sinking back into the deep with movements that barely disturbed the surface. Within minutes, they had disappeared completely, leaving only fading bioluminescent glows in the water beneath us. The 12-second pulses faded into the distance. We stood on the deck in silence, trying to process what had just happened. First contact with an alien intelligence. Except they weren't alien. They were terrestrial. They'd been here long before us, and they'd probably be here long after we were gone. Did everyone else feel that? Marcus asked over the radio. That communication? Yes, multiple voices answered. We all had. Every crew member who'd been watching the encounter had received the same message, the same warning, the same ultimatum. Captain, Locke's voice broke the silence. You need to return to Pearl Harbor immediately. There will be debriefing teams waiting. Everything you experience needs to be documented and analyzed. Granger didn't respond immediately. He was staring at the water where the creatures had vanished, probably thinking the same thing I was thinking. How do you document the impossible? How do you explain to people who've never been into the deep that we share this planet with intelligences that dwarf our own civilization? How do you convince anyone that the ocean isn't just a resource to be exploited, but a territory held by entities that have prior claim? Acknowledged control, Granger finally said. We're heading in. The debriefing in Pearl Harbor lasted for 3 weeks. They separated the crew, put us in different facilities, questioned us individually so they could compare our stories and look for inconsistencies. They wanted to know everything. What we saw, what we heard, what we felt during that moment of contact with the creatures. Dr. Locke was there for my sessions, along with others I didn't recognize. Military brass, intelligence officers, scientists from agencies that didn't officially exist. They made us sign documents that classified everything at levels I didn't know existed. Non-disclosure agreements that came with federal prison time if we ever talked about what we'd encountered. The public can't know about this, one admiral told me during the final debriefing. The economic implications alone would be catastrophic. Shipping lanes, deep-sea mining operations, submarine warfare doctrine, all of it depends on the assumption that the ocean is a resource we control. If people knew there were intelligent creatures living in the trenches, creatures that could destroy our vessels if they wanted to, it would trigger global panic. So, we just pretend they don't exist? I asked. We acknowledge they exist within classified channels. We adjust our naval operations to avoid unnecessary contact. We respect the boundaries they've communicated to us. But publicly? The USS Barracuda suffered equipment failure during routine operations. Reactor coolant leak. The boat had to be decommissioned. The crew was honorably discharged with full benefits and medical support. And the other encounters, the 17 signatures you mentioned? Being monitored through deep ocean listening posts. We're cataloging their movements, their communication patterns, their population distribution. But we're doing it quietly, passively. No more direct contact missions until we understand them better. They understand us, I said. They've been watching us for thousands of years. We're the ones playing catch-up. The admiral didn't disagree. They discharged me with full disability benefits, PTSD they called it. Traumatic stress from the reactor coolant incident that didn't actually happen. They set me up with Dr. Vega, who knew I'd been through something but couldn't be told what. They gave me enough medication to knock out a horse and an apartment in San Diego where I could look at the ocean and remember what lived beneath its surface. Tyler Foster and Brandon Lee, the only other survivors of what became known as the Barracuda incident, disappeared into the same bureaucratic system. I tried to contact them through VA channels, but their files were sealed. Probably scattered across different cities, same as I was, to prevent us from comparing notes or going public together. For 3 years, I've kept the secret, drank too much, took too many pills, sat in my apartment watching the Pacific and wondering if the creatures down there ever thought about the submarine crew they'd encountered. If we registered in their ancient memories at all, or if we were just another brief curiosity in millions of years of observation. But I'm done keeping quiet. The Navy can court-martial me. The Defense Department can throw me in prison. I don't care anymore. Because people need to know the truth, not the sanitized version that Locke and his colleagues want to present in classified briefings. The real truth. We are not alone on this planet. We never have been. While we were building cities and inventing computers and congratulating ourselves on being the pinnacle of evolution, other intelligences were watching from the deep. They've been down there since before our species existed, building their own civilization in places we can barely reach, and they're not happy about how deep we're digging. The mining operations in ocean trenches, the submarines patrolling at increasing depths, the plans to build underwater research stations in Hadal zones. We're pushing into their territory, disturbing their world, and they've been patient so far. But patience has limits. That 12-second pulse I heard 3 years ago? I still hear it sometimes, late at night when the world is quiet. Not through sonar equipment, just there. A reminder, a warning. The creatures gave us a message, and we need to listen. Stay shallow. Stay in the parts of the ocean that belong to us. Respect the boundaries they've established, because if we don't, if we keep pushing deeper, keep disturbing the ancient intelligences that live in the trenches, the next encounter might not end with warnings. I'm recording this testimony and uploading it to every platform I can find. The Navy will try to take it down, claim it's fiction or the ramblings of a traumatized veteran. They'll use their classification powers to suppress the truth. But maybe, if enough people hear this story, someone will start asking the right questions. Someone will demand transparency about what really happens during submarine patrols in the deep Pacific. Someone will force the government to acknowledge that we share this world with intelligences that dwarf our own. My name is Ethan Mallory. I was a sonar technician aboard the USS Barracuda, and I'm here to tell you that everything you think you know about the ocean is wrong. There are things in the deep, ancient things, intelligent things, and they're watching us right now, waiting to see if we're smart enough to learn from their warnings. I hope we are, because I've seen what lives down there. I've looked into eyes the size of stadiums and felt the weight of millions of years of intelligence studying me like a laboratory specimen. They gave us one chance, one warning. We better not waste it. The 12-second pulse is still out there, broadcasting from 17 locations worldwide, still beating like a planetary heartbeat, still reminding us that we're not at the top of the food chain. Not even close. And every day, I sit in my apartment and watch the Pacific, knowing that somewhere beneath those waves, something massive and ancient is doing the same thing. Watching. Waiting. Wondering if we're going to be smart enough to survive what comes next. I hope we are, but I'm not betting on it.